Instead of a breakdown for this week's episode, the biggest thing that I wanted to spend time talking about was Isaiah Bradley. This character is introduced into the MCU during the second episode of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and his interactions with Sam and Bucky are silver screen magic that really highlights the grand dilemma that many of our heroes face. Now, my first watch of the episode, I really wasn't that impressed. It was a fine episode, but honestly, I had to cancel my weekly discussion over on the Fandom Media channel because I really wasn't feeling it, and I didn't want to give people hype over a show that I wasn't genuinely hyped for myself. That was until I watched the Comics Explained video about Isaiah Bradley, and in the first couple of minutes he shows a comic where this character came from, and my jaw dropped and distant memories started flooding back to me. Truth, red, white, and black. I once had this full set, but a former stepfather stole it for, I think, crack money. But, I have two remaining, and brilliant life choices aside, this comic is a beautiful short story that introduces Black Captain America in a brilliant and terrifying way. His introduction into the MCU comes when Bucky and Sam are looking for leads into the super soldier serum that is clearly being used still. Bucky brings up this person that he knew from a previous life, and we come to Baltimore, Maryland. This entire sequence highlights the racial tension that is being explored in this series. It starts with a child calling Sam the Black Falcon. Now, on the surface, it's just a kid saying what he knows without explicit malice, but Sam laughs it off, just saying it's not a big deal, and it isn't a big deal. But I've been thinking about how this phrase is used for days now, and it's part of the reason that this video has taken so long. A child calling him Black Falcon isn't morally wrong, but it's not his name, and it's useless information, which is ultimately why it's errored. In writing, there's a big back and forth between writers to use somebody said for the majority of your dialogue tags, or somebody exclaimed or grunted or shouted, or always changing it up. Now, I'm personally on the fence on this, but based on my thoughts of that writing technique, I've employed this golden rule here. Unless it adds something to the scene or it's needed for context, don't use the adjective. So Black Falcon doesn't need to be used because Falcon is his explicit name, and there aren't a dozen other Falcons. At the start of my video, I used the term Black Captain America. This is because in the comics, for the Black community, this was explicitly how he was known and rumored to exist. And it's a required adjective here because Steve Rogers is known as Captain America, and of course that could be confusing. I absolutely love the subtlety of this first interaction because it shows the youth of Baltimore using terms that their parents told them, like we all have done. But if he continued doing this without being corrected, it could cause harm by having Falcon's identity misrepresented. Falcon wants to be called by his name, not a slang that focuses on his skin color, and that is absolutely his right. It's a great way to start this three-part scene that addresses how society views and treats Black men in America. First, we see the children, and then we come to the elderly. After his grandson tries to protect him from strangers at the door, we learn that Bucky knows Isaiah from a skirmish in the Korean War. Now, this is a little different from the comics, again, where Bucky isn't directly involved, but Isaiah at one point comes face to face with Hitler. So in the MCU, they're starting his story during the Korean War to make it, I guess, easier to follow. But at the same time, they are missing some incredible moments in Isaiah's story, which directly relate to gas chambers and Hitler trying to convince him to join their side because America doesn't care for Black people. We got a similar scene in the Watchmen series, delivered with great effect, and I guess we won't be getting that here, but we learn that Isaiah was feared by Hydra and that his mission was to hunt the Winter Soldier, a mission that he failed, only managing to take off Bucky's arm. Isaiah was curious if Bucky was there to finish the job, but he tells him that he's not that person anymore. Isaiah, of course, in disbelief.
You think you can wake up one day and decide who you want to be? It doesn't work like that. Well, maybe it does for folks like you.
Now, this is massive. The US military turned him into a super soldier and then afterward, for a reason still unknown, imprisoned him for 30 years. In the comics, he was sentenced because of him stealing the Captain America uniform, but that doesn't directly appear to be the case here. The importance of the scene is showing us that the US wanted to reproduce the serum, and it created the conditions to make that possible. They either framed him for whatever crime he was charged with, or they did not speak up during sentencing when it was time to consider all of the good things that he contributed to the world. Both, would make them accountable for why he sat in there for 30 years. So he does sit in there for 30 years, and I think the importance of that line about them taking the blood and ultimately why the scene abruptly ends after this is because that is the answer that they were looking for. The super soldier serum formula is either coming from his blood because of the government testing or another soldier's blood, which could still exist in, if you look at Bucky's, for instance, and all the testing that he's gone through. I personally think that they will lean into this being an American issue, thus highlighting all that he's done and could do for the world while still getting none of the credit. I think that would be the most impactful story, and the cherry on top is that this really hits home for Sam. Being a black man in America, even while being a superhero, he gets called a color before his name. He doesn't have the goodwill at the bank to help his own family. I guess we also have to infer that he doesn't get paid what he's worth by the US government. As they stand there arguing about why he's never heard of him, the police come. They stand before homemade signs to stop the violence with sad, black faces highlighting loss and tragedy while two white police officers jump out and give Bucky the benefit of the doubt while believing that Sam is the problem. It isn't until Bucky speaks up for Sam, a white person validating a black person's right to be there and speak freely, that the police talk to each other and realize that these are Avengers. The icing on the cake is that as the scene is de-escalating, backup arrives and the cops have to be made aware of the situation. This shows that before they stopped the car, they called for backup, fearing what this would turn into, highlighting the final part of this sequence, of course, the black adult experience. This is a masterful way to speak about race and how systematic issues could exist when everybody adds to the problem without even considering it from the black perspective. Fathers tell their children racially charged names, which then spread to other children. The military mistreats black soldiers. The government mistreats black prisoners. Police officers give white civilians subtle doubt while giving black civilians full-blown suspicion. A real problem. And as a black American soldier, Sam Wilson is in a really unique position where he has to wrap his head around all of this and still fight for the red, white, and blue. Let's also not overlook how Bucky must be feeling as well, as a soldier who is fully aware of how organizations can prey on their subjects. Him also ending up in cuffs because he missed this court-mandated therapy. I feel like this was meant to show how, even after you've righted your wrong, the system tries to keep you down, keep you stuck in that box that is comfortable for them while not addressing your real human life. I love this part of the story more than I think any other so far, and this three-part structure of showing the youth, adult, and elderly lives of many black Americans is incredible, not to mention, the dynamic of current and past soldiers, just honestly so good. I do really hope we see more of Isaiah Bradley's story appear in this series, but with it not being in the World War II era, I doubt that we'll see some of those haunting moments that appear in the comics. I do think they could show the other black soldiers that were experimented on and ultimately how it ends up with him being the only one still alive, because that could be delivered with some very impactful emotion behind it, but we may have all that we need to know about him at this point. His grandson is also very important and ultimately becomes one of the Young Avengers with the help of a blood transfusion from Isaiah. So, only time will tell. Thank you for watching my video. Please be sure to subscribe if you liked it and check out my other content over here or on Twitter or on Patreon. My highest tier donor this month, of course, is the legendary supporter, Michael Linck. Much love, everybody, and I cannot wait to talk to you all again soon.